Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started, and we want to welcome everyone to our panel discussion titled "This is America: Black Military Service Members, Veterans, and Their Mental Health." And we're going to be focusing on a range of stressors this population faces, with a particular emphasis on mental health and coping resources that are available. A housekeeping rule: if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, and we'll answer them at the end of the panel discussion. Okay. I am the moderator for today. I'm Dr. Michael Gatson. I'm an Army vet. I'm also a mental health provider at the VA hospital in Baltimore. So, our first panelist that we have is China Holmes Brantley. She's a licensed independent clinical social worker in the District of Columbia with over 25 years of experience in mental health, clinical counseling, family and victim advocacy, and military health. She's passionate about helping the whole person on their path to healing and currently works for the Department of Army Family Advocacy Program. She also has a life coaching practice they call Dream Chasers Life Coaching. Please welcome China Holmes Brantley to the panel. Our second panelist is Dr. Corrine Elmore. She's a pediatric psychologist serving at Walter Reed National Military Hospital. At Walter Reed, Dr. Elmore pioneered the first integrated pediatric behavioral health position in the National Capital Region. She's also serves as assistant professor in the pediatric departments of the F. Edward Herbert School of Medicine, Uniformed Services School of Health Sciences in Bethesda, Maryland, and she trains medical residents and students. And she has also published several articles and books chapters on parenting, culturally relevant practices, and integrated care. Our third panelist is Miana Graves, and she has dedicated her life to continue learning and understanding the psychology of how people think and learn. And specifically, Miana is interested in the language we use to express our emotions in social relationships. And currently, she's a clinical psychology doctoral student at the University of Houston, Clear Lake in Houston, Texas. She has served in various settings and capacities, including the Air Force as a space operation officer, and providing a well-rounded view and approach to provide problem solving. And our final panelist today is Lakedra Smith, and she served 6 years active duty and 4 years as a National Guard member. She's also a master level full-time clinical therapist, and she's in her last year of her advanced human behavior doctoral program. Please welcome all of our panelists today. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started with some questions. So, understanding the intersection between the potential trauma of being Black and in the military, what are some of the challenges specific to Black service members and veterans?
So I guess I'll just go ahead and get started. So thank you first for this invitation to speak on today and the opportunity to speak on such a relevant issue. I think one that, impacts our active duty service members, veterans, families, caregivers, and communities. And these are the individuals and families who have made such tremendous sacrifices for us in our country. So when I think about that question, I first and immediately think about for, our Black and Brown service members. They're attempting to walk and coexist in two worlds simultaneously. One where they're a marginalized community, where lack of acceptance in the broader community, racism and gender stereotyping, just to name a few of the many challenges. And then there's the military culture,
Mhm.
which identifies the individual first by your uniform and rank, and where the individual is trained to conform to the rules and structure of the larger society. And this is the same society or community in which they have suffered from generations of race based cruelties. So, when I think about the various stressors that our African American service members and veterans experience, it's something that's multi layered and definitely interconnected on so many levels. And despite the gains, and there have been tremendous gains, so I don't want this to be like a negative narrative, or appear to be a negative narrative or bashing. But despite the gains, I think, we need to understand the context, right? And history speaks for itself. The history books speak for themselves as it relates to minorities, particularly African Americans within the military. And African Americans have fought in every war fought by or with the United States. And we're still dealing, I think, with some of the impact of those that have served or who were drafted, like particularly during the Vietnam era, and who returned to a community that did not support them, not only as veterans, but as Black men and women. And we see this today, with many of our service members and veterans. Um, and many of our Black service members have the compounded stress of mental health challenges associated with war, multiple deployments, facing the reality of institutional racism, even within the military system, and having to deal with the very real challenge of accessing needed supports and resources in communities that have been, as we're very much aware, have been underserved for generations due to systemic and institutional racism. And I thought back earlier this morning or this afternoon in the opening remarks, someone had mentioned, I thought was just so impactful. Dr. Cash, she mentioned, unhealed generational trauma.
Mhm.
And so again, I thought about how that really relates to when we talk about the interconnectedness, right? In terms of how when we're entering into the military, or how when individuals enter into the military, that they're often coming in again with some of this race-based trauma experiences on top of some of the military related trauma or PTSD. Um, and so when we look at it from a systems approach, impact of war, multiple deployments layered on top of those existing and sometimes never addressed trauma experiences or experiences in childhood, often places, I think, particularly from a behavioral health standpoint, being a behavioral health provider, it places our African American troops at higher risk, and due to the underlying fears and biases as it relates to mental health treatment and who is considered a prime candidate for treatment. And they spoke also too earlier about some of the biases, and I know we'll get into that in a moment. But often when Black service members, often, they'll hesitate in seeking help, and exploring the intersection of trauma among our African American service members. A lot of times we're referencing the intersection, again, as I mentioned earlier, the combat related PTSD and the cultural or race related trauma, and that's often been referenced to as the post trauma slavery syndrome. And
Yes.
it's those compounded stressors that I really believe that contribute to both the mental as well as physical problems that disproportionately affect, our service members and veterans. So I
All
don't
right.
want to hog the time, so I don't know anybody else
All
add
right.
to it.
Thank you so much, China. Miana, what is your understanding?
So I'll speak a little bit about specifically being a service member and what I experienced during my time. And before I forget, hello, everybody. So nice for you to join us today. I'm happy to be here. Okay. So going back, thinking specifically about my time as a service member, I think China summed up very well some of the relevant points that come up. But specifically when she mentioned community and like deployments, or just think about geographical separation that happens for our service members. So your home, whether that be in Houston, Texas, and Los Angeles, California, you join the military and you could be shipped anywhere in the country and a lot of times internationally too. So once we leave our home, we're now in a completely new environment. And when you go through basic training in the military, whether it's as an officer or enlisted, they preach the we're a family, we're together. Like these are your troops, your team, your battle buddy or your wingman, whatever branch it may be. And then you get somewhere where you are physically and sometimes emotionally separated from your team, and you don't feel that sense of family that you were told that you were going to have going in. So
Hmm.
that could be very just taxing. And if you think about like a high stress environment, like being in a deployment where you could be fighting for your life or, just constantly in fear, you don't have the support that you thought that you were going to have. And then something else that can come up sometimes, China also mentioned about rank, is we have our officer troops and then we have our enlisted troops. And we're not supposed to fraternize, right? But if you go in as a Black officer, like I did, a lot of my counterparts that were Black were often enlisted. So I faced many incidents of discrimination just for talking to my troops. It could have been a check in. Hey, how are you doing? Hey, did you hear the new Jay-Z album came out? And someone was always over my shoulder watching, writing down notes. I got pulled into my commander's office on multiple occasions. Like, we saw that you were talking to such and such. It looked like flirting. What does flirting look like? Am I not allowed to check in on my troops? Um, so as the higher ranking person, you're always going to take the punishment, whatever that may be. But how awful is it that as an officer, I can't check on my troops and make sure that they're doing okay emotionally without fear of being written up or reprimanded in some way? So again, that interferes with the community that we could have, because I don't want to get written up. And if you're the enlisted person, I don't want to risk the person that looks like me getting written up, because I need somebody on the team, even if it's from afar. So I think that that's a specific challenge that Black service members, and also like our brown and other BIPOC service members, run into pretty often.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Miana. And that takes us to our next question. We had someone in the chat box asking about were you all in the military? And so our next question is, do you believe there's a negative connotation for mental health in the military? Lakedra, can you share some thoughts on that?
Yes, I do feel that there is a negative connotation on mental health in the military because we already come in with this, weight on our shoulders that we have to show up as Black African Americans in a foreign society. We come from different backgrounds, different cultures. We learn new things in the military. I went in at 18 years old. So this was how I was raised by the military per se. Mental health was not a topic or a conversation at all until I became a mental health therapist and I started bringing up the conversations. And it was just based on symptoms. So somebody sitting in the corner and I'm like, okay, why you're not mingling with everybody else? Why you're not socializing? Oh, my mom just died. I went to the funeral, now I'm back on duty. Okay, well, you might be grieving, but we're told to soldier on, show up, drink water, right? So it's really not a conversation. And we used to joke about ASAP, and ASAP is Army Substance Abuse Program. If you have a drinking problem or if you have issues with any type of substances, you supposed to go there. But the joke was if you go to ASAP, you're getting kicked out ASAP. So it's just like, don't do it. You're going to lose your benefits. You're going to lose your opportunities. You're going to lose everything that you work for. And we are already held to a higher standard coming in. We already have to work harder. We already have to come in as Black African Americans to show up and be better and do better. And especially as a Black female, I was the only Black female currently now in my unit. And I automatically have that pressure. And I always say they take care of me. They definitely do take care of me. I got 3 degrees under them. So they take care of me, but it's just the mental stigma that I have on myself to show up. And not only that, my comfortability, how we talk about mental health. So today I did wear my Black Girl Magic shirt because being in uniform, I'm uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable showing who I am, and I'm uncomfortable just recognizing that part of me because, like I said, I grew up in a society where we're inclusive and you're taught to be inclusive. So when you're growing up and you're maturing in the military and you're figuring out who you are, then you do have to understand that I am an African American Black female. And I think that now I'm learning that after 11 years of being in.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Lakedra.
And can
Miana, I'm sorry,
I,
Ty.
Oh no, go ahead, Mian. I just had a thought that just threw in. I just was thinking about when you were talking about just your voice and being comfortable in your own skin, and we mentioned about the uniforms. I just thought about the various different policies that have recently changed, and again the standard, right? Whether it was a written standard or whether it was just kind of understood as it relates to our Black service members, and even when it came to hair. And so I just thought about that, Lakeisha, when you share that, and just again the awareness that we can be one, but each of us are individual, and each of us brings something unique to the play to the space. And I think that's one of the issues that has affected many of our Black troops is the fact that individualism wasn't honored. So sorry.
No, you're fine. That's absolutely great. Thank you so much for sharing that, China. Miana, do you want to share from an officer standpoint?
Yeah, certainly. So a few incidents that I could think of were either I knew someone personally, like a friend that went to mental health, or I had a troop that I recommended to go, and it just didn't end well for them,
Hmm.
which certainly plays into the stigma of why people don't go. So one of my very best friends, at some point while we were in the military, like I mentioned before, geographically, she was separated from everybody. So we went to Howard University. It was as black could be. We had the full diaspora there. And then she was stationed in New Mexico. There are not a lot of black people in New Mexico if you haven't been. So she started drinking a lot more. And part of the officer culture is to drink. I've drank at work before. They say one drink or one shot, but like drinking is a big part of the culture.
Hmm.
Um, so she started drinking pretty heavily. And then she realized I have a problem. Like, I need to get help. I want to talk to somebody. So she reached out to the mental health folks on her base. They set her up with a 30-day inpatient rehab program. She thought things were going well. They were like, we're going to take care of you. She went to her 30-day treatment, came back to separation papers.
Mm.
So how do we as officers, if we're setting the standard, like it's okay to have something go wrong, right? Like we're not always going to be perfect. There's a lot to carry. So if we set the standard and go to treatment and come back to separation papers, how do we recommend it to a friend or to our enlisted troops? So that's one example. I had a troop of mine. He was in my unit. He was driving one day. He had two other airmen in his car. They got in a car accident. One of the young men died, unfortunately. There was no alcohol, no drugs, because they did the full array of testing. None of that was found. It just was an unfortunate car accident. That young man had PTSD from the incident, one from losing a friend, but also the trauma of the accident. Recommended him to go to mental health. His career also ended. And he was, in terms of legal action, the family of the young man who passed away said, he's been through enough. This was not his fault. There were no drugs, no alcohol. We don't want to press charges. But the military persisted with pressing charges against this young man. And he had sustained, little traumas over time, eventually compounding. He separated, so he lost his job. He spent time in military prison, and it affected what he wanted to do after, which was to go on to be a nurse. And when he went to mental health, of course, there's confidentiality, and he was able to share things in confidence, but confidentiality is a little bit different when you're active duty. So information that he shared made its way to his trial. So again, how do I recommend those services to somebody when these are the outcomes?
Hmm. Absolutely.
I
So,
wanted to, oh, sorry. I wanted to just touch on it really quickly from working with children. Um, we have a lot of that same stigma too with the kids, first of all, because of a lot of the service members' experiences with things like you all talked about. But then also, the military's put in a lot of different preventative services for kids. So, someone like me who works in primary care, I might see a child at 3 months old. They'll have a record that they met with the psychologist at 3 months old. But it really might be just for sleep training or something like that. But a lot of the parents are scared to get those resources because there's also a direction that if you've taken ADHD medication for a year before you try to enlist, you can't enlist. But it depends on the service, and they made some changes, but it's confusing. And so I try to find out as much as I can to make sure I'm not leading parents down something that could mess them up. But then also, the rules can be written or unwritten. And so it's hard to know. And I think we see that even with the dependence of the military.
absolutely. Um, they've changed a lot of standards and policies, and there are a lot of services that are available when it comes to mental health. They have a START program, but people are still hesitant about going to get services. So, what are some potential barriers to mental health treatment as an active duty service member or a veteran?
I'll just jump in. I mean, I think there's several, just, and I think we've been talking about several of those. I think one of the biggest ones, I think, again, still remains attitudinal. It's the stigma related concerns, and negative attitudes towards mental health professionals. And again, particularly when we look at the African American community, in terms of mental health resources. I think, again, we have to go back, we have to look at it in terms of context and look at in terms of how, when it comes to the assessment, the diagnoses, of particularly of African Americans in the mental health community, how there's been a disproportionate number of individuals who have been diagnosed with, again, psychotic disorders and other mental illnesses and mental health issues that, again, potentially could be problematic for them, not only getting in the military or staying or remaining in the military. So again, and even if someone has a diagnosis that could be managed and treated and they can remain in the service without any necessary negative issues or concerns, again, their frame of reference, right? And again, understanding historically kind of how African Americans have been looked at, particularly within the mental health, plays a role. So I think, again, that's a huge, I think that's one of the biggest barriers. Not only for our enlisted, for those who are currently active duty, but also too in terms of veteran services. It's those attitudinal belief systems, again, which I think impact individuals seeking service.
Thank you so much for sharing that, China. Lakeisha, did you want to share something as far as the potential barriers?
That's it. Just, many of the barriers that we have, we really put on ourselves. And, and that goes back, we're not bashing the military, but most don't know what we face, don't know what we deal with, don't know the issues that we have. And we already come in with the pressures, maybe from our families, from our upbringing, and we don't know how to communicate that I'm the only Black female here, because we already are groomed that this is what we got to do, this is what we're supposed to do. So we put a lot of pressures on ourselves, just to, try to change the culture of speaking up, understanding, gaining more knowledge for ourselves so that things can maybe change.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Did anyone else want to share on that topic, or we kind of covered it all? Okay. All right. So, what are some healthy ways service members can integrate themselves back into society once out of the military? And how do you actively support your own mental health post service? And how did your family contribute to your readjustment?
So I'll take this one. So for me, integrating into society outside of the military was kind of hard for me because I wanted to surround myself around my battle buddies. That's all I knew. Into adulthood, that's who I hung with. That was the lingo. That was the language. That was my family, as Miana say. So coming off of active duty, I actually enlisted as an officer with ROTC while I was going to school for my bachelor's. And it was a lot, especially with a family, but I needed that. I felt that I needed that part of my life. So eventually I started hanging out with different types of people. Just even coming outside of my culture, because in the military, I clung to the African American soldiers. We literally would sit at different tables. If you walk in the room, you would see other cultures, and then you have the African American culture. We just sat together, we were familiar with one another. So I had to make a conscious decision to not want to do that anymore, and it was hard and it took a long time, but I said, you know what, I need other friends. I'm tired of being called Smith. I have a lot going on in my life. I have other identities, and I need to be respected. So in order to get that, I had to change my environment. I had to change the people that I surrounded myself with. And usually in the military, it's not that clear.
Okay, thank you. Miana, you want to share about your experience?
Yeah. So opposite of like Kedra, I don't feel like I ever really left the other parts of me, but that's because I had the luxury of joining after college. So by the time I made it to the military, like they had a whole adult with the identity, and I was very rooted in my Blackness already. Um, and then I ended up stationed in California, which is where I'm from. So I wasn't quite at home, but I was close enough to get to my people. Um, for me, in terms of like when I separated, integrating back wasn't, for me, it wasn't that difficult. And that's just because I kept in touch with other people that I had went to ROTC with, but they were like also my Howard family.
Mhm.
Um, but for others who I have seen have more of a difficult time, I think like Keidra gave the best advice, which is to find other spaces where you're comfortable, whether that be like a dance class, yoga, pottery, you know, like whatever it may be. I think to find other groups and spaces that feel like home and to spend time with those people, as well as the folks that you were in service with. Like a balance of those is most important to me.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So the next question I have is, what are some ways that children and families are impacted by having a parent who's an active duty service member? Dr. Elmore, you want to share on that?
Yeah. So I work only with children. And so I hear a lot of things. I think the biggest one is just the disruption and stability.
Hmm.
So that could be stability with which parent is in the house. We'll have one parent be deployed, and then when they come back, the rules of the house have changed. So like when we were just with dad, we could do this, but then when mom came back from deployment, we had to do this. Or if both parents are active duty, having to switch that. And then also with PCSing and moving, the kids have several moves. And a lot of the kids I work with, they like that they move. They like meeting new people and starting over and things like that. But we know that with children, stability is and routine and structure is one of the best things that helps them to thrive. And so with those disruptions, we see a lot of change. And as soon as they kind of get settled, they're moving again, which
Hmm.
can be really hard for kids. And then I would say also when parents come back with any type of PTSD, which even if it's not severe trauma, just coming off of being deployed and then coming back home is a trauma. It's a change. And so I've had a lot of parents, be it the service member, that kind of get treated a little bit like furniture in the house. Like
Hmm.
they're there, but they're not really to be interacted with as much. Maybe loud noises bother them. And so I hear the kids like, oh, yeah, my dad, he's there. He's cool, but they don't really interact with them.
Hmm.
And so, what I try to do as a psychologist is to make sure all of the parents and caregivers are integrated, even if it's grandparents for African Americans. A lot of times, kids might stay with their grandparents or aunts or uncles while their parents deploy, but getting them all involved so that they can feel like they have a say in what happens with their children. And then I would say outside of adjustment, another big thing is anxiety, because again, it goes with stability. So I thought we were gonna move last month, but we moved this month. I don't know when my dad's coming back. I don't know what kind of school this is gonna be. Is it gonna be all Black kids like me, or is it gonna be all foreign kids, or what's it gonna be? They don't know. They have to get in so many different cultures, and so a lot of those kids have high standards for themselves, and their families do as well. And so I think anxiety is my number one referral problem.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Let me hear from someone on the panel about the significant others and how they may struggle.
Well, I think just to piggyback a little bit, I work with the family advocacy program currently, and so, you know, first and foremost, I think the majority of individuals, family service members, do an outstanding job in terms of addressing all of these issues. And children and families and individuals are more resilient than we oftentimes give them credit for. So that's first and foremost. And of course, obviously, there are those that do struggle, with the adjustment, including, the spouses, including the significant others. for all those reasons that Dr. Elmore mentioned earlier, is that adjustment phase. And that's where we usually see a lot of the issues that come up and may bring them to our attention, unfortunately, is during these periods or times of adjustment. And then if you compound that with an individual who is struggling with some, whether it's post-traumatic stress disorder or some other underlying emotional issues or behavioral issues or concerns, whether it's a child, these are other stressors that are compounded. And so you may have a significant other who, again, may be during a time of deployment while the service member is away, is trying to manage the household. And if you compound that with a child who does have, whether it's an emotional or behavioral issue or concern, and they're away from their family, as Dr. Grace mentioned, they're away from their family. So they're isolated and they don't feel like they have the support. That can put a lot of additional stress, which could, unfortunately, sometimes lend to issues around child neglect, or for the individual themselves, some form of self-harming behavior, whether it's alcohol or drugs or some other addictive behavior. So again, those are issues I think we have to be mindful and aware of. And again, just kind of compound with the fact that if you have individuals, particularly individuals of color, if they're isolated in these pockets, again, as was mentioned earlier, in places where they may not have that support, other individuals that look like them or providers who look like them, there may be some avoidance about seeking help and seeking support to help some of these issues that can be managed, with the appropriate supports. And I will say the military does make an effort to make those resources available. But it's about awareness. It's about the trust. And again, a lot of times that trust is back to, sometimes it's hard to trust individuals that don't look like us. Because again, back to kind of historically, kind of what we've had to deal with in the past, in terms of the kind of some of the generational issues. But there definitely are some significant areas where, again, significant others are impacted by the deployments and just by the military culture and lifestyle itself. And that's a whole nother issue, an adjustment that they have to try to navigate through without adding all the other complex stuff that we've mentioned earlier.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And this is our final question, then we're going to open it up to the audience for questions. What resources do you think are or would be beneficial for the unique and complex experience of Black service members?
So I'll start. For me, my private practice, breaking chains counseling, was surrounded around not normalizing the issues that African Americans face, such as anxiety, depression, behavior issues. And what I found in my studies was that military members, if a single of that parent or that mother or their grandmother is now a single parent, if the other parent is deployed, and the behavior issues are very similar to a household who has an incarcerated parent. So that child has those same behavioral issues in both aspects: the neglect, the depression, anxiety, isolating. So definitely it's not normal. It's not normal. It's not okay. And they have to have an outlet. And the parent stresses, the kid stresses, the sibling stresses. So it really is a dynamic that affects the whole family.
Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Elmore, do you have any resources that you would like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I was going to say, because I didn't only want to talk about some of the struggles that these families are having. Being a civilian myself, I've been so blessed to work with the military, because what I do see is they're usually a strong family unit. So a lot of two-parent homes or some other family support helping, like they're really serious about their families. And so we have resources like Military One Source, which a lot of our service members like to use for behavioral health, because they don't keep a record that would go in their military record. A lot of the spouses will use it. They don't want to talk about infidelity and then get their partner in trouble. So they'll talk about it with Military One Source. But there's another great organization called Blue Star Families. I recently did some work with them, and they have a lot of money and a lot of backing. And so during the pandemic, they were paying for kids for childcare. for kids to be able to do extracurricular. So they would pay for each child's extracurricular in the family. I work for one of the largest military hospitals only with kids, and I had never heard of them. So what I usually recommend is getting with, it's called Fleet and Family at our installation, but with the Family Resource Center, and they have a bunch of resources, but a lot of times service members are scared to access them because of the record, but most of these resources don't keep records. And so I think that's an important part to know, that even if you got them from your base, they don't keep records. And then one last thing I want to plug was there's a new parent support program that they do, and a lot of people don't know about it. They'll come to your house for up to 6 months and help you with a new child. Come to your house several times a week. And this is for any military service member, any branch, as long as you have a kid 0 to 3. So you could even have 6 and 7-year-olds, and they'll help with them as long as you have a kid 0 to 3. So like things like that are so great and not available in the community. It's just people don't know about them, and then also are scared to take the resources. And I think it's our job to do education to let them know.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Elmore. Anybody else want to share some resources before we open it up to the audience?
So just a couple of more resources, and I think we're going to have some resources that we're going to post in the chat room for individuals to kind of take note of, but also too, in addition to the Fleet and Family Support Center, which is typically, that's typically associated with bases that are run by Navy, but for Army and other bases, and for, Marines, you have the Army Community Services. So with them, they're also very similar to the Fleet and Family FFSCs. They run classes, and they do things, offer workshops around, particularly for dependents, resume writing. They have a job program where they help assist spouses with finding employment. And then they do parenting, and they do all types of classes as well. And so in addition to that, you have your behavioral health programs that are attached to the majority of the medical treatment facilities throughout the country. And so you can always check into those. And then also too, I don't think we mentioned this one, the military and family life folks, the MFLACs. And so similarly to the other program through the Military One Source, they do not keep records. So again, and they do a lot of work around couples, so couples counseling, as well as other kind of psychoeducational groups. And so they're also a great resource as well. So the individuals can go and seek help without that fear of, oh, is this going to get into my medical record, my ALTA record, and then therefore, something that can be used against me at some point. So that's also another great resource. And then can't forget the chaplain services. Chaplaincy also too is a great resource as well too. They offer, I know they at least it did prior to COVID. That's another program that they have a lot of money, or they have money, more money than some of the other programs. And so they would do marriage retreats several times throughout the year. And I know in this area, hey, they will go up to Annapolis, which if you don't know is a very nice area, rent out hotel rooms, pay for childcare so that you could bring your children in. They will have babysitters, and then you and your partner can engage in these workshops throughout the course of the weekend, for free. All this are free. So lodging, food, childcare for free. So again, it's just really a matter of kind of tapping into and becoming familiar. And that's one thing the education piece is so important. We talked about earlier in terms of making sure that you get connected as soon as you join. And I know a lot of stuff, you're hit with a lot of stuff. It kind of goes in one ear and out the other. But as my thought is, the moment you enter, you need to be preparing for your exit.
Mm.
So you need to be thinking about once I do whether it's 4, 5, 20, 25, 30, whatever it is, what is it that I want to achieve? What is it that I want my life to look like? And you need to begin that process now from day one. So making those connections, developing that community, developing those resources, coming up with some form of a plan, and just kind of actively working on it. So, but again, those are just a couple more resources I wanted to throw out there.
Okay, thank you so much. For the sake of time, we have listed some resources in the chat box, and at this time, we're going to take questions from the audience.
I see one in the chat.
From Alondra. So Alondra has the question as she's done research on military sexual trauma and its connection to child sexual trauma. She found that Black women who face CSA are vulnerable to MST. What resources or preventions, interventions, postventions are available for this particular population of active duty and military veterans? She's asking about MST, service members or veterans who have a connection to child sexual trauma.
So just, okay, I'm sorry, go ahead. Kid, did you want to speak
Uh,
first?
No,
Go ahead.
I was saying for that, we do have the RAIN program, RAINN, which is Rape, Abuse, and Incest Network. And that phone number is 1-800-656-HOPE, HOPE. And it's a national sexual assault hotline. So that would be the quickest and fastest way to seek help for an individual in that type of situation.
Thank you. Can you put that in the chat box where they can get that phone number and information? Thank you. China, you wanted to add something?
No, I was just going to add, so I'm understanding from the question, I can't see if somehow the chat box disappeared on my screen. So I was going to go back and read the question, make sure I was responding to it appropriately. But if an individual active duty service member is coming in, they're dealing with their own history of childhood sexual trauma, is my understanding. So again, behavioral health resources are available for free. And again, I am attached with the behavioral health unit. Or under the behavioral health unit, and we have many service members, male, female, that again have a history of childhood traumas, and that a lot of times they haven't had any treatment for, or are just really coming to the place to really where they're even really able to acknowledge it. And so we do create safe spaces for those individuals to come in for treatment. And it doesn't have to be something that you tell command necessarily about, as long as you schedule that appointment time and get in there for those services and supports. And we offer groups. I know it varies from installation to installation. I actually facilitate a healing circle. It's called the Healing Circle here on our installation, which is open to women, all women who have experienced some form of trauma, whether it's childhood, whether it's, but it's usually related to some form of sexual or relationship violence. And so, but those are resources that are available. In addition to, as was mentioned, RAIN, and then you have your SHARPs, you have your sexual assault programs, and each branch, I know, has a different acronym for them, but unbeknownst to, I think, many active duty service members, is that even if they haven't experienced a military related sexual trauma, those supports are still open and available to them. And they will ensure, those victim advocates will ensure that you are linked to the appropriate resources and support to help assist you. And if you decide at some point to take some form of legal action, because some folks do, and there's always the state requirement piece, they can help you with that process. And again, make sure that you get connected to those individuals that can support you and help you through that process. So check out your local SHARPs.
Thank you so much. And the next question is, were all of you service members?
I could answer. So, like Keidra and I were both service members, and then Dr. Elmore and China were not, but they work with service members and their families. Oh, Dr. Gatson is also a veteran, if I remember correctly.
I was a spouse, so that's my.
So you serve.
Well, yes, right.
Yes.
You serve too.
So I don't have any other questions. I looked through the chat box and I looked under the QA. Do we have any other questions before we wrap up with our closing remarks? I don't want to overlook anyone.
I was just going to add a resource if anybody is typing while we're doing that.
Okay.
So we didn't mention it, and I know that the VA can get a bad rap sometimes, but the VA is certainly a resource for veterans, whether it be military, sexual trauma, deployment trauma, whatever it is. Like, there are mental health services available through the VA. And I will say that because of the pandemic and the transition to telehealth, many mental health services are available over the phone or on like video chat. So while you might not be able to see someone in a different state, like the provider needs to be licensed where they're treating, it certainly opens up options for other VAs that might have a specific specialty area. So like I'm in Texas, it's possible I could see a provider at the VA in San Antonio where they have a specific sexual health therapist there who's trained in everything from sexual health to like more trauma related like sexual issues that could come up. So telehealth has been helpful in just the reach and access for veterans. And also, I learned this recently in regards to the VA and a resource just after service. One thing that veterans could do for themselves is make sure that they file a VA disability claim, whether it gets approved or not. I was watching Jon Stewart. I don't know if y'all seen, like, he has a new show. I was really excited about it since he left his other show a couple years ago. But on that, in his recent series, he's been highlighting some of the difficulties that veterans have had, specifically those who were deployed in the late 90s, early 2000s, like in our Desert Storm and Global War on Terror that just recently ended. And many service members have these like respiratory related conditions. Many of them are getting cancers, lymphomas, and some other kind of rare cancers from burn pits overseas. And the head of the Veteran Services Organization, he said one of the best things that veterans could do is file the claim. Even if it gets denied or tagged as not service related, it provides the data so that they can go back and pull and start to tie health related issues to veterans that were located in a specific place at a specific time. So it's certainly encouraged that veterans continue to file claims. Like China said, from the day you get on active duty or in the reserve component, plan for your exit. Go to the doctor if something doesn't feel right. If you hurt your shoulder and you think it's not that big of a deal, go report it, because you never know how it's going to show up later in life, especially not if you go in at 18 and you're like, oh, I fell, no big deal. And then like you're 30 and you're like, why does my back hurt every day? Mm-hmm. Because you fell when you were 18 with a 50-pound backpack on and someone should have looked at it. So yeah, just filing those claims with the VA and advocating for yourself for those services in the VA system is critical for veterans, family members of veterans, because sometimes veterans can't do it. Like if we have PTSD, depression, a psychotic disorder after service, like mindset isn't always in a space to do it. So advocating for our loved ones who can't is critical.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing that, Miana. We had one more question, but I think we are out of time. Alexis, do we have more time or do we have to wrap up? We have time for one more. So the final question is, they would love to hear your thoughts on military married to military and the mental health challenges that go with that.
Could you repeat the question again? I'm sorry, I can't see the chat box.
The question is military married to another military service member and the mental health challenges that go along with that with two service members that are married to each other.
I could touch on it briefly. I actually think Dr. Omar brought up a good point earlier about one parent being in the home and then one parent being deployed, and then maybe that switching, or with moves sometimes one parent that's the military member will get orders to move and they take the family, and the other person is at another base. That can be very taxing on families. I've also seen mill-to-mill couples where they have been in different places 90% of their career. So they've never actually lived together. And when we're not actually living together, we don't really know how to communicate, right? And what it's like to be with that person day in and day out. And then they move together and it's like, I don't even like this person. Who are you? I don't want to raise kids with you because I've got to be by myself with the kids and we had our roles. And now there's another person. That could be really difficult. Same thing with trauma. It's just as taxing for it to be a mill-to-mill couple as it is to be a military and civilian. And what do you do with, like, we've been talking about mental health, which is important, but also thinking about like physical disabilities that people come back, and the stress and the tax that could have of, if you have a mill-to-mill couple, one person deploys, they lose a leg and come back. That person is no longer going to be in the military. So there's that. So now we're losing a source of income. And then there's adjustments related to the trauma of loss of limb and moving forward with the family in that space. So those are, I mean, some of the more difficult things that I've seen. But like China mentioned, I've also seen some really strong family units, which I hope we hit some of the high points. Like there's a lot of difficult parts about the military, but you definitely see some good, some really strong families that do communicate well, and they have a good system that works for them.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And we're going to wrap up on that. We want to thank all of our panelists, Lakeidra Smith, Dr. Elmore, China Holmes Brantley, and Miana Grays, for sharing a wealth of knowledge and resources with the audience. And we want to thank the audience for coming to our panel discussion on This is America, Black Military, Veterans, and Mental Health. Thank you so much.